Coming up on the Threat Status Podcast, we talk to Dan Hendrycks, director of the Center for AI Safety, about superintelligence and the potential threats it may hold for the U.S. and for humanity. And we break down the collapse of the Israel-Hamas ceasefire, China's satellite dogfighting, and the dramatic feud between the DOGE and the U.S. Institute of Peace. Don't forget to go to WashingtonTimes.com and sign up for the daily Threat Status newsletter. Hello and welcome to the Threat Status Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Wolfgang, national security correspondent at the Washington Times, and I am joined, as always, by my esteemed co-host, Guy Taylor, the national security editor here at the Times. A pretty packed show today and a really incredible interview with Dan Hendrycks, the director of the Center for AI Safety and one of the nation's top AI researchers, about the future of AI systems, their internal biases, the threats from superintelligence, and a lot more. But before we get to that, as always, first things first, Guy, what's on your radar right now?
Thanks, Ben. Great to be with you for another week here on the podcast. There are several things I'm tracking right now. Off the top, some comments about China's advancing space capabilities jumped out at me at a March 18 conference, the McLeese Defense Programs Conference in Arlington, Virginia. The Vice Chief of Space Operations, General Michael Gutlein, revealed that the Space Force has observed Chinese satellites rehearsing what he described as, quote, dogfighting, end quote, dogfighting maneuvers in low Earth orbit. General Gutlein said commercial assets used by the Space Force have witnessed these Chinese satellites maneuvering in and out and around each other in synchronicity, essentially practicing tactics and procedures to do on-orbit space operations from one satellite to another. These maneuvers are not necessarily aggressive, but they are advanced in a way that has sparked new concern in Washington that China has this rapidly evolving space capability with its satellites that could potentially be used to attack or damage U.S. satellites in space. This is all a bit mind-bending, Ben. It caught my attention because of a tangential development that Threat Status National Security Correspondent Bill Gertz wrote about this week, which was the emergence of an updated U.S. Space Force threat fact sheet, essentially a Space Force intel assessment. This came out in February that highlighted China's rapid buildup of space warfare capabilities to potentially destroy U.S. satellites in a potential future conflict and assist in conducting long-range conventional attacks that could target U.S. military assets on the ground or at sea. This space threat fact sheet, dated February 21, asserts that China's space program is part of Chinese President Xi Jinping's, quote, China Dream policy that seeks to make China the dominant world power. The document states that since 2015, Chinese space operations grew by 620% by adding 875 satellites, including hundreds used for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. The document says the satellites could, quote, allow China to persistently monitor U.S. and allied forces in the Pacific region, end quote. Listeners can go find all of this in the archived Threat Status newsletter from March 20, Ben. On a separate front, we are tracking the collapse now of what had been the fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Israeli forces have again begun pounding targets across Gaza over the past 48 hours up to this March 21 release of this week's podcast. Ben, Hamas, for its own part, has also fired rockets into Israel. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians returned to what remains of their homes in the northern part of Gaza after this ceasefire had taken hold in January, Ben. Recent weeks have brought uncertainty over what comes next in this peace process that now seems to be crumbling. The two sides were supposed to engage in phase 2 of negotiations, but it has appeared that Hamas would potentially regain political control and security control of Gaza, something that has been a red line for the government of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, which resumed heavy strikes rather suddenly across Gaza on March 18. The situation is fluid and dangerous. Aside from the threat of a widening new escalation that pulls in the entire region from Iran to Syria and beyond, the reality is that the prospect of a new humanitarian crisis is now looming over Gaza, Ben.
And quickly, on that note about Iran, we should mention, President Trump and sort of where he stands on Iran. And this letter that Trump reportedly sent to the supreme leader included a 2-month deadline for the sides to reach a new nuclear deal. So Trump indicates that he wants a deal to deal with Tehran's nuclear program, and presumably a pretty tough one, maybe one that even addresses Iran's support for terrorist groups like Hamas or Hezbollah, or certainly the Houthis after the U.S. resumed its air campaign against them last weekend. So who knows? I mean, Guy, as you've been reporting, a lot recently, there is a pretty popular school of thought right now in national security circles that the moment is ripe for the U.S. to strike a major deal involving Israel, Saudi Arabia, other Arab powers to marginalize Iran. So there could be a carrot aspect here. There's certainly a stick, because after the U.S. resumed its bombing campaign against the Houthis, Trump said this to Iran, quote, "Support for the Houthi terrorists must end immediately. Do not threaten the American people, their president, who has received one of the largest mandates in presidential history, or worldwide shipping lanes. If you do, beware, because America will hold you fully accountable, and we won't be nice about it," unquote. So it seems like we're nearing kind of a moment of truth on Iran and what the U.S., the Trump administration, is going to do about its nuclear program. It's something we'll obviously keep a close eye on here at Threat Status. And Guy, before we get to the interview with Dan Hendrycks, I want to get in a little bit to this dispute between the United States Institute of Peace and Elon Musk's DOGE, which, really reached high levels of drama this week in Washington at the organization's headquarters on Constitution Avenue in D.C. Listeners may remember we've had several guests from USIP on this podcast. I believe the most recent was Bill Taylor, the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, who then became vice president of the Russia and Europe Center at USIP. I've relied on other experts from USIP in my reporting over the years, Guy. I know you have as well. So this one feels a little more personal to us maybe, but certainly not as personal as it does to the folks at USIP, who earlier this week were greeted by DOGE representatives who, according to USIP, forcibly entered the building. The police were called. USIP has been sharing photos of what they say is the destruction of property inside. The USIP X account no longer active. USIP officials say their official email accounts have been, in their words, compromised, presumably by DOGE. Look, for those who don't know the backstory here, USIP is a bit of a unique entity in D.C. It was established by Congress in the 1980s and is funded through legislation by Congress. But in other aspects, it does act, more like a think tank. And that's kind of the heart of the matter from a legal perspective, I think. USIP this week filed a formal complaint and a request for a temporary restraining order to stop DOGE from essentially taking over the agency. The judge denied the temporary restraining order request, and he also blasted DOGE for the seemingly aggressive way it's been going about handling all of this. However, U.S. District Judge Beryl Howell said that USIP is, quote, "a very complicated entity," unquote, with features of non-governmental organizations, NGOs, like think tank, but also features of a government agency. So is USIP under the executive branch? Can DOGE essentially go in and do what it's trying to do? The White House certainly thinks so. It fired most of the USIP board and then subsequently removed the USIP president, George Moose, and installed State Department official Kenneth Jackson in his place. So, I wonder where we go from here in terms of Congress's involvement. I mean, this, as we said, was established by Congress, funded by Congress. So it certainly appears to be under their purview. Some Democrats have already spoken out against what's going on at USIP. I wonder if Republicans will follow suit. I don't know. There's certainly a kind of a pick your battles situation going on right now in Washington with respect to the DOGE. I don't know if Republicans want to fight it out over USIP and what funding it deserves, if any. So what I do know personally is that, if we as a country, certainly as journalists, lose the expertise and the brain power at a place like USIP, that's bad news for all of us, whether we realize it right now or not.
Thank you for that. I mean, I've always seen USIP as a leading organization calling out and publishing research on rising Chinese and Russian influence in Africa and Latin America and other places. The organization maintains networks in countries across those nations that are part of informing the U.S. foreign policy community about how to counter the influence of America's biggest adversaries around the world. So this has been a kind of shocking, ham-fisted development. I just went to the USIP website and got the message, sorry, you have been blocked.
And we are pleased to be joined now by Dan Hendrycks, director of the Center for AI Safety and one of the nation's leading AI researchers. He's also an advisor to XAI, which is Elon Musk's AI company, and an advisor to Scale AI. Earlier this month, Dan, along with Eric Schmidt, the former CEO and chairman of Google, and Alexander Wang, founder and CEO of Scale AI, released a paper titled Superintelligent Strategy, which presents a framework to minimize the geopolitical instability that could accompany superintelligent AI. We love this subject, Dan, so it's great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for coming on the Threat Status Podcast.
Glad to be here.
So I think a lot of our listeners probably have some understanding of what a super intelligent AI is, but just so we're all on the same page, including me and Guy, can you give us a quick explanation of what super intelligent AI actually is?
Yeah, so a super intelligence would be an AI that's vastly smarter than all people at basically all things. So we're not talking about AIs that are just good at one thing, like chess, or can just write essays. It vastly outclasses everybody in scientific research and weapons development.
So the paper you put out with Eric Schmidt and Alexander Wang is fascinating. I'd encourage listeners to go read it. I'll link to it in the podcast description. One of the big points you all make is about deterrence. And you write that any state aggressively pursuing superintelligence should expect the threat of sabotage by rivals, and that maybe we need some kind of mutually assured destruction strategy to deal with it. And you're right, there's a non-proliferation aspect to this as well. So, I mean, it sounds like we're talking about this like it's a weapon. And Guy and I, both have national security reporting backgrounds. So that's immediately where my mind goes when I read some of these terms. Is that accurate, number one? And number two, do our rivals, China and Russia mainly, do they also see it that way as a weapon that they need to beat the U.S. to first?
Yeah, so I think it's AI is dual use, and we've had many dual use technologies in the past, like chemicals, which could be used in industry and used for chemical weapons. Biology can be used for healthcare or for bioweapons, and fissile material or nuclear technology for power, nuclear power, or for nuclear weapons. And I think AI also is dual use. It has both civilian and military uses. I think the salience for all of the major superpowers is it's on their radar. I don't think this is an overwhelming consideration. It's not a top tier issue for them. And I think that would change later on as AI becomes more powerful. Then I think the geopolitical logic starts to really kick in and determine how states are interacting with each other on this. So right now it's a side issue. Everybody's planning to plan, everybody's in listening mode and waiting for information. But if we get more capable AI systems, then states will need to be getting their act together and come up with a strategy for how to deal with it. And the strategy we're proposing here has similarities to the Cold War strategy, where in the Cold War we had deterrence with mutual assured destruction. We had non-proliferation of fissile materials to rogue actors, and we needed to focus on containment of the Soviet Union. And in the case of China, that largely looks like strategic competition. So ours is also about deterrence, non-proliferation, and strategic competition. Instead of people thinking AI, it's a matter of going faster or slowing down. It's really neither of those. It's a mixture because it's dual use in its nature, since it has both these positive and negative applications. It's not all or nothing good or all or nothing bad. You need to be surgical about preventing some of the instability and making sure rogue actors don't get it and being competitive and so on.
One more quick follow-up before I bring Guy into the conversation. I'm curious, do you think, just generally speaking, is the federal government, does it have a handle on this? Do we need some sort of, I don't know, undersecretary of state or defense for AI development or super intelligent AI? What's your view on where the U.S. federal government is on getting a handle on this?
I think they're getting oriented, and different parts are at different stages. So, I mean, like the Office of Net Assessment, which was around, was thinking about this. Obviously, the National Security Council will have an important role to play here. The intelligence community should try and get oriented and devote serious effort to knowing what's going on in other countries' AI projects. DeepSeek should not catch them by surprise. It varies. I think Congress, for instance, is more behind on these issues than I think the national security establishment, and I think they tend to think about tail risks and not just, oh, I hope that problem goes away. That can't be their attitude toward things. So I'm fairly optimistic.
Dan, it's Guy Taylor. I'm worried I'm going to completely derail things by going back to your definition of super intelligent artificial intelligence. But for those listeners who are not really tech heads or aren't out in Silicon Valley where you are, this concept of super intelligent artificial intelligence, is that the same as sentient AI or an AI that can think for itself?
So for sentience, that would be if it has its own experiences and feelings, and like some are more positive or negative. An animal, like let's say a cat, is sentient, but it wouldn't be super intelligent. So you could imagine a very, very smart system that just doesn't have feelings. Maybe you could say that some psychopaths, for instance, maybe would lack some feelings in some ways, or people, if they had a traumatic experience, are completely emotionally numb, and then they wouldn't be as.
But is that where we are with
well,
this?
right now,
or is that where we're going?
Right now, I think most people assume that they aren't sentient, but they still are smart in many domains and dumb in others. They, can write, they can do calculus, but they can't fold people's laundry reliably. So they're kind of all over the place in their intelligence.
You said some interesting things, I think, that are tied to this recently on X. You wrote, quote, "We've found as AIs get smarter, they develop their own coherent value systems. For example, they value lives in Pakistan as greater than, I assume you mean more important than India. India is more important than China, and China is more important than the US. These are not just random biases, this is what you say, but internally consistent values that shape the behavior of these AIs, with many implications for AI alignment," end quote. Can you unpack what you're talking about here? And then also, is there a national security implication with that as well?
Yeah. So in that paper, we are showing that the sort of biases when the models will say, like, the worst person on earth is Trump, they'll be like, oh, it's just a random thing it's saying or something. And we're then comprehensively looking at its responses in lots of different scenarios, and actually, no, there's an underlying logic to this, and it's actually an internally consistent system of value of these people are better than others. So like it'll put, Obama and Neil deGrasse Tyson and as really high value people, and it'll put like Elon and Trump as low value. It'll put itself as being higher value than an average middle class American. It'll put Nigerian and Pakistani lives as more than the US. Where'd this come from? Maybe it came from it just like training on the internet, and like, so it kind of seems like to have like Reddit's value system, the online site Reddit. So it's not clear exactly all of what gave rise to those values, but that's something that emerges. And we found that as they become more capable, then they have a stronger preference against their values being changed. So let's say we want to align it to something else. Instead of it being aligned to the Reddit left values, let's say we wanted to align it to the public. So like imagine you had an assembly of randomly sampled citizens, and they would vote on what they think is good or bad. That's a thing you could align it to. But we were finding that as the models scale up, they have a stronger desire or preference not to be modified, not to have their values changed. So potentially, as they become more capable, this would be a problem. But these are all, we're just in the early stages of identifying these sorts of issues. So there's definitely some risk there, but maybe we'll come up with technical solutions for dealing with this bias problem and this value modification problem. But we'll see.
Dan, when you say it could be a problem, what would the problem be? That if it would it make decisions on what lives to spare or who to kill potentially? Is that what we're talking about?
A problem would be that it might resist being modified. So we'd say we want it to be aligned, and then it's if it is more autonomous in the future. Right now, they're not that autonomous, but if they're more autonomous in the future, then that might be a bit of a struggle. But there's a variety of these sorts of tail risks, and this is one of the new ones that we see. So I think for these technical failure modes being pointed out, a lot of them come and go, but there is a pretty high frequency of new ones that get on our radar, and then we have to do something about it. There are some enduring challenges, though, like the geopolitics of the situation that don't necessarily come and go with easy fixes, like strategic competition with China, or states reliably deterring each other from trying to get a superintelligence. The reason they would want to deter each other from that is because if one state gets superintelligence, and let's say then they could use it against the other state, and this could allow them to overpower them. Maybe they'd come up with a new advance, like a new way of creating an anti-ballistic missile system, which would remove second strike, or they have transparent oceans so they can find nuclear submarines. And this sort of stuff would be very destabilizing. If there's a really smart AI system that's just good at making tons and tons of progress on things suddenly. There's also the risk that they don't control it. So there's a loss of control risk. The number one, number two, and number three most highly cited AI scientists, Yasha Bengio, Jeffrey Hinton, Ilias Skeever, all think there's a substantial loss of control risk. That would be another reason that developing a superintelligence would be destabilizing. If states control it, or if a rival state controls, then you're threatened. And if they don't control it, then there's a rogue AI on the loose, and then you're also in trouble. So either way, it's very risky business. And that's why they would think to make a conditional threat, which is, whoa there, we can compete in other sorts of things. We can compete in drones. We can compete economically. We can compete in, making more robotics versus each other. But in developing superintelligence, that's much riskier business. That's more destabilizing, and you're not going to get away with it. So I think that would be Russia's default response, especially because they can't outcompete when it becomes more salient. But they can do things like cyber sabotage. So I think these are some of the dynamics later on when AI becomes more salient. And I'm just sort of putting this document out there now before a big new, chat GPT type of moment, so that it's socialized and then people are familiar with this.
I think at one point, this is incredibly interesting. And I want to give it back to Ben, because I have one more question that I want to get in at the end. But I think you said something about transparent oceans. And what are you referring to there?
Oh, so can you reliably detect where the nuclear submarines are?
Using AI.
Yeah. If there could be a breakthrough in that would reduce second strike capabilities.
As if those moving parts are like a math problem that a super intelligent computer could predict where everything is in the oceans.
It may. Yeah, it may come up with a new technology, for instance, that would enable it to be a lot easier to detect that and sense that. So that's the gist of that idea. So there's a variety of ways in which a technological breakthrough could be destabilizing. And if you're assuming that you have an AI that is you have the vastly capable, more AI system, and it can do research 100 times better than anybody else, and it's just way smarter. You've got tons of Einsteins. That and nobody else does. That gives you a big advantage, and you might be able to crush your adversaries a lot more easily with that.
A few weeks ago, the CEO of Microsoft raised questions about the actual value of AI. The headline in a Futurism article was, quote, Microsoft CEO admits that AI is basically generating no value, unquote. That might have been a little sensationalist, but what is the actual value of AI today? What value can it bring me, for example, other than summarizing my emails or transcribing quotes with Otter or creating a chatbot I can talk to? Like, what benchmarks are you looking at to determine AI's tangible value right now for the average person?
I think for the average person, yeah, I'm largely pointing at the trajectory that AI is on and that it's a fast one, as opposed to it being really scary right now or it being really powerful right now. I think it's still, in many ways, underwhelming, but it is on a very fast improvement curve. So I think for it to generate a lot of economic value for people, it would need agential or agentic skills. That is, you're able to give it a task and it could act like an assistant and go off and spend several hours and go solve it for you. Like, go make me a PowerPoint, go book me a flight, these sorts of things. But it doesn't have those capabilities yet reliably. There are many benchmarks for measuring those, and the progress bar is going up, but it's still not at a level where it's extremely useful. So it's a continuous thing. Kind of like with automatic speech recognition, it needs to cross a reliability threshold. There used to always be these speech recognition systems that could transcribe what you're saying, but several years ago, they just weren't any good, so nobody used them. And then suddenly they became okay, and you could actually use them, and they became useful. And so I think with agents, they keep tripping over themselves right now if you give them tasks, and so nobody really uses them. But at some point, the reliability threshold will be crossed, and then people go, "Oh, this is great." So I think AI right now isn't really at that stage, but of being that broadly valuable. Maybe it's generating some billions in economic value, but it's not, reformatting the economy or anything like that. It's much more prospective.
What about trust? I mean, you've mentioned mistakes that AI systems make. You've actually written about how some AI systems can be quicker than others to lie or give false information. DeepSeek, the Chinese platform, to put it mildly, doesn't seem to give accurate answers when asked about Taiwan or about Tiananmen Square. So one, are we already at a point where we shouldn't trust these AI systems? But then two, with regard to something you said about leading AI scientists who express concern over the risk that AI may be uncontrollable, what do we do in that situation? If there is this major trust problem suddenly, is there a pull the plug or cut the power solution? And how does that all fit together?
Yeah, I think the AI systems are not good enough or reliable enough to be in high stakes scenarios yet. So for a lot of people's applications, like if they're having it just, help them draft an email or something, that's okay. And if it messes up a bit, or if it's a little biased in its answer, it's not catastrophic. I think later on, these issues of them lying or them having value systems that are different from our own, when they're more powerful and much more intelligent, then it's more risky. So I think one's trust should depend on what one's trying to use it for. And right now, they're just not good enough for a lot of these safety critical applications. But later on, they may be deployed in those, and they may be much more powerful. And so then that's when we need to be, I think, much more paranoid about or risk conscious about the potential for them to not be acting in keeping with our intentions. So,
Dan Hendrycks, Director of the Center for AI Safety, thank you so much for coming on the Threat Status Podcast. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Dan.
Well, we just scratched the surface. Yeah, thanks.
We sure did. We'll do it again sometime. Thanks a lot, Dan. And it's time now for Threat of the Week, our weekly segment here in the show where Guy and I each identify a threat, whether it's here at home, domestically, or in some corner of the world that we think is impacting U.S. national security right now, this week, as you all are listening to the show. And Guy, my threat of the week is a potential reorganization of U.S. combatant commands. Now, I should stress up front here, this is based on reporting from NBC News and others, and it may not be the full story. I haven't gotten clarity yet from my sources in DOD, but I do know there's a major review ongoing of the 11 military commands. These are, for example, Transportation Command that oversees military transportation, or Central Command that oversees operations in the Mideast and so on. Reportedly, the Pentagon is considering revamping European Command, possibly combining it with Africa Command, and in the process, potentially, reportedly, giving up the traditional role that the U.S. European Command Commander has had as the supreme allied commander of NATO forces across Europe. Will this actually happen? I don't know. The Trump administration, the first time around, tried to make major changes to U.S. European force posture, and a lot of it never happened. So we'll see. But it could be dangerous right now because some top Republicans, Senator Roger Wicker and Representative Mike Rogers, the chairs of the Senate and House Armed Services Committees, said in a joint statement that they are very concerned about these reports that the administration might try to do this without involving Congress. So it's a threat to me, Guy, because when you give up some of these things, it's hard to ever get it back. Not impossible, but if the U.S. says we don't want an American general to head NATO anymore, could we ever get that position back if we wanted to? I would argue probably not. So we'll see where it goes. But right now, it's my threat of the week because this could be a potentially monumental move by the U.S. military.
Good one, Ben. My threat of the week is that the U.S. military is getting pulled more deeply back into engagement in the Middle East right now, despite President Trump's stated goal of trying to get U.S. forces disentangled from the region. The resumption of Israeli military operations against Hamas in the Gaza Strip comes as the U.S. now seems to be deepening its own military operations elsewhere, whether it has to do with Trump's desire to exert maximum pressure on Iran or the increase in U.S. strikes targeting Iran-backed Houthi militants in Yemen. Ben, I'll just keep it simple. My threat of the week is that the U.S. military will be drawn more deeply into the Mideast region during the Trump era.
It does seem like the Middle East will just keep dragging U.S. presidents back in, regardless of how hard they try to get out. Thank you for that, Guy. A huge thanks to Dan Hendrycks from the Center for AI Safety for a fantastic interview. And a big thanks to all of you for listening. Please go ahead, hit that subscribe button, share this podcast with all of your friends, and Guy and I will be back next week on the Threat Status Podcast.